Hey guys, welcome to the DeFi Recode episode number 10. We've got Kieran over here to speak on NFTs and artwork as an art collector. Really excited to have him on and discuss about everything he's been getting into, NFTs and the such. And I'll kind of let him introduce himself here, his background, and how he got into art collecting.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm Kieran Parker-Moroney. I'm a DeFi and NFT enthusiast. I've been in the crypto space in some fashion since about 2016, 15 now. Came across Bitcoin a bit earlier. Sadly, didn't invest back in 2013, but then discovered Ethereum. And the kind of rabbit hole descent started from there. So I set up a company in the space in 2019 with a couple partners. Didn't work out, sadly, with COVID. It was around recruitment in the space, but it kind of led me even more into the community. And I just stayed ever since. So I now work in venture capital, so investing in startups. I work with a fund in the UK, not crypto focused. So this is more of my hobby. But art collecting I've done for 7-8 years now. I got into it through a friend of mine who was big into the art space. I'd always studied art, and I studied history at university, so was interested in that. Just kind of casually got into collecting pieces, and then it grew from there. So I was more on the traditional side. I collect a lot of contemporary artists, from kind of Daniel Arsham to Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin to Carmen Herrera is a favorite of mine. And then not just big names as well, just random small artists I found on Twitter and the likes. Which when I found out about NFTs, it just immediately resonated with me from a collecting standpoint. I kind of understood the potential value there and thought it was interesting, and it grew from there. So I think that's a fairly winding answer. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to cover.
No, that's great. Do you remember like the first art piece you purchased, like what it was and what interested you? What kind of caught your eye with that?
Yeah, there was actually a couple kind of around the same time. One was a piece by this artist called Carmen Herrera, and she must be like 103 now. And there's an amazing documentary about her on Netflix. I think it's called 100 Years. Well, let me Google it now. It's so good, but she's incredible. Like, she wasn't really recognized until she was in like her 90s. The 100 Year Show, that's what it was called. And she's Cuban American, and she does real abstract art, but it's kind of geometric designs. And I just found it really satisfying to look at. And I managed to get a print from hers. They're not originals. She's too expensive. But that was the first like major piece. Before that, I'd kind of had some friends gifted me. A friend of mine who's an artist, he does like some imitation Banksy work, and he knew I really liked that stuff. So that was my kind of foray into street art. Which I've still got the piece he made for me up on my wall. But Carmen Herrera was the first piece I bought where I was just like, wow, I can't believe it's mine. And yeah, I don't know. It was just really satisfying. I think that's the thing with art. It was just satisfying to look at for me. I just enjoyed it. It was, like I say, if you Google her, she's very kind of geometric shapes, abstract work. It's really simple, but I love it. And I was like, yeah, I want to hang this. And then I ended up buying a lot more from there.
Absolutely. And when you found like cryptocurrency and basically Bitcoin, Ethereum, what kind of made you get into those? Was it the art at first, or how'd you get into crypto and finding NFTs?
Yeah, it was a completely separate world to me from the art. It's funny how they've crossed over, but I've always invested. I've done some angel investments and advised some startups. I've tried some startups myself, and always been in and around that scene. So the idea of just a digital money was the thing that when I first read about it interested me, and I thought, yeah, I can completely see where that could be a use case. And I know the narratives evolved over the years, and there's a store of value narrative for Bitcoin, and so that was what grabbed me there. On Ethereum, it was more the kind of programmability, and I'm not a coder myself, but I just found the flexibility interesting. Like they're two very different things in my head. I know that a lot of people argue, and it's quite a contentious area, but I found them both interesting for different reasons. When the whole DeFi space started taking off, well, actually before that, in the kind of ICO era, I just thought it was interesting that people were able to use this as a base layer and were trying these experimental things. So I participated in a few ICOs thanks to a few friends of mine, including Alex. Shout out to Alex if he's listening. So I've still got my Bloom token from back then in 2000 and what was that, 18, 17? But yeah, it wasn't because of art that I was interested. It was more just from my investor brain and looking at interesting opportunities and kind of asymmetrical opportunities. So the NFT kind of crossover was just a happy coincidence, I'd say.
That's amazing how the world's kind of merged, and you find yourself being able to do both in the same place almost.
Yeah.
What is your like definition of an NFT for those that might not understand what it is? Like, what is your definition?
Yeah, I think it's still being debated, and obviously you've got the more boring, it's a non-fungible token. So yeah, it's not that. But for me, what it represented was kind of a certificate of authenticity or ownership. That's where I saw it, being applied in the art world. And that was kind of my mental view around it. I know it can represent an LP position on Uniswap V3, and there's a lot of other things that it could potentially represent as ownership in a company, or maybe in the future it's going to be able to be title deeds. But for me, it wasn't the artwork itself, it was the certificate of ownership or authenticity. And that's how I kind of separated it from people saying, the whole I can right click save, now I've got your piece. So for me, I viewed it as as a title of ownership.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And kind of jumping into your Medium article here, which I posted in the chat for anybody who's there can kind of click on it. You kind of jump into ownership and authenticity, and like speaking about that a little further, it really makes sense to me, like how people can now prove their ownership. And like you go into the article, like speak on like how people traditionally would like authenticate art and how this kind of changes with NFTs. I think that's a really important thing that I read out of your article that kind of clicked with me, like, wow, this makes a lot of sense,
Yeah, there's a few ways. So depending on the piece of art, historically you have provenance is a huge thing in art, and that's what often gives things value. So being able to kind of prove the history of ownership is one thing, and that can add value in itself. So if another famous artist, or an actor, or a famous collector, or just a person of historical significance has owned a piece of art in the past, and you're able to prove that can add value. And then being able to categorically and strongly prove these ownership points, and that when this piece of art changed hands, that is provenance, and that adds value because you're able to basically confirm the legitimacy of a piece of art. And so that's one way that people do it. You have these certificates of authenticity that also come with art. And so if you buy an edition, it will come with a stamp or a certificate of authenticity, and you're able to say, I bought this, and I have. So to use Banksy as an example, in my article, you have a certificate of authenticity, but you also have, if you don't have that, you're able to send the piece to pest control, who will look at it and say, yeah, this is an official Banksy, and we're able to do that. Historically, you've also had foundations do that. So the Warhol Foundation did it. Basquiat and Picasso also had authenticators, but Warhol, I think I allude to this in my article, stopped doing that. The foundation in 2000, and it was like 2010, 11, around then, just because of legal costs, because they were overzealous collectors who, either you wouldn't authenticate their piece and they'd come after you for that, or vice versa. There's nerves about liability for if you do say that a piece, you think a piece is an authentic piece, and then it turns out it's not. So there's a few different angles historically in art. You have provenance, just if something's well documented. You have original certificates of authenticity that come when you sell the art, which are a big part. You have appraisers and authenticators who can give you a degree of certainty after something's sold. They're the main things. And then you have reputation. So if an auction house is selling it, you have a kind of degree of certainty that they're quite, if it's Christie's or Sotheby's who are in the news for NFTs at the moment, they're quite confident that they're selling a piece. You can be more confident that it's real versus a probate auction house that you've never really heard of, but they just happen to have this interesting piece in the past. Or if it's a gallery or a print house doing things. So you've got Maddox Gallery in London as an example, or different print houses doing things. There's tiers to it, and the higher they are, basically, the more comfortable you can be with either the authenticity, the legitimacy, or the quality of the print. So that's kind of historically how it's done in art. I'm giving a high level overview.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about how like there could be troubles often like getting authenticity certificates, COAs, from like the Warhol Foundation having to stop. Like reading that, it's like, wow, this is a large problem that I never really thought about that could be solved with NFTs in the future and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just on that point, you have artist books that foundations and other places will have these artist catalogs, and you can go to those and look and say, okay, this is a confirmed piece, and get some sort of comfort there. But the buck does stop somewhere, and people, if there's money to be made, there are always going to be people kind of either creating incredibly convincing fakes or trying to push stuff as fakes or as lost works, and none of these things are ever fully comprehensive. And so once you kind of get out of a core collection of an artist's pieces, once you are operating on the periphery, there's a big gray area.
That makes a lot of sense. Power Live had a good question in the chat. What's your knowledge on like metadata storage? Do you recommend IPFS or some other alternative? I'm assuming he's saying like how the NFTs are stored. There's been like a little bit of issues with that, if they're on the blockchain or if they're URI or anything like that. Have you looked into anything like that? I have not gone that far.
Yeah, I have a bit. It's a debate. It's an area of debate. I mean, I'm a fan of if stuff can be stored on chain, that it should be. I think there was an artist, I can't remember who it was now, who did a kind of almost performance art piece where they'd sold NFTs and then they changed what the reference file was, and all the pieces changed to rugs. So he did a literal rug pull. I'm trying to think who it was, and it started kind of a debate around what it is that you're buying when you buy these things, and so I think it's still being figured out. If you can put it on IPFS or Arweave, or I think there's other options for how you can do on-chain storage. I think I like seeing that because there's an element of security and finality to it, but it's still, from what I can see, there's no sort of agreed standard that people are doing when they do this. So there's a lot of stuff that's stored off chain, and I think there are advantages to that. But that would kind of be my initial thing. I think the more, it depends on what you're offering. If it's just like a kind of static image NFT, I think the more security you can add, the better. I'm not sure once you get into the technical weeds, if you're doing things like there's these polymorphs that Universe just released, and they can change you can change what the image is as it goes along. And I've not looked into the technical aspects of that, so I don't know whether that's stored on chain or not with IPFS or others. So I think it depends on the use case, but I like to see stuff more secure if it can be.
Yeah, and I love in your article here, you have this nonfungible.com releases a fantastic yearly NFT report, and it's in one image here. How far back do NFTs go? Like, how long have you been in them? Because I just learned about NFTs basically this past year, so
Mhm.
it's relatively new for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm somewhat similar. I think the origins of the first NFT is something I've seen debated about a lot on Twitter, and people point to CryptoPunks for that. And I think it comes down to definitional debates from what I can see. What a lot of people argue as well is something like maybe CryptoPunks the first NFT because they were deliberately designed for that. They have the story, the narrative behind them, and they were kind of widely accepted. And so that is an argument I've seen put forward. For me, like I was fairly similar to you. I kind of came across the concept now in it probably would have been like the start of 2020. And one of the first things actually I remember seeing that got me really interested in it, I'd kind of seen the terms put around, but I saw Duncan Cockfoster from Nifty Gateway speaking at an online event. And he started talking about them, and they were really early. This was before they'd really blown up. But he was speaking about ownership and being, skins in games and things like this, being able to own stuff outside of games and not be dependent on whether, Fortnite or Minecraft or one of these, companies for whatever reason just shut down or decided to turn off, that all of a sudden you haven't lost, a skin that you bought or a gun or a sword or these different things. And then how that kind of extended to artwork. And that's when I first came across it in a bit more depth. And I just thought that sounds really interesting. I'm going to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it allows like not only like the players of games, but like the artists that work for games, like their artwork will transcend from game to game. If somebody's collecting your NFTs from Fortnite and Fortnite goes away, but that artist moves on to another game, I think they'll kind of be able to have a following of their art, and collectors of their art and skins, I guess, that they're making, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think you see this thing of the creator economy put around. But one of the things that really interested me was digital artists have always been a thing and been around, and there's some people that make amazing work. But my understanding has always been it's been fairly limited as to what they could do. They can create obviously relationships with people, but collectors and collecting, I think at the end of the day, a lot of that does come down to scarcity and ownership. And that's where higher levels of value accrue on things. You could commission a digital artist to do something for you and a custom piece or things like that, but it's quite niche. I guess it still is, but for me, I thought that's really interesting because I feel like you're just opening up this whole economy that just wasn't able to exist before by being able to make these things scarce or being able to show that you own something, you own an original of something.
That makes a complete sense, and it kind of ties into the next part of your article here, the opportunities for digital creators and everything like that. And I love how you touch on Ferocious in here and like how far he's come, and like they're just like the ability for a digital artist to grow so quickly and get artwork out there in the hands of so many is crazy to me. Just the skyrocket of NFTs, and I guess kind of being in the right place at the right time between him and Beeple and stuff like that. And I know Beeple's been putting out artwork for years, and he's just now kind of getting the recognition to kind of go along with that. And like, I feel like this is going to help. Do you feel like this will help artists monetize their work kind of like faster? It seems like in the traditional world, artists would put out art for years and years and years, and it was really hard for them to monetize it. And now this kind of like helps people make a living off their art like right away, I guess.
Yeah, I think it changes things, and we're also in danger of some things staying the same. But traditionally, from what you see for the real top tier artists, yeah, it's generally quite a lot of time spent toiling away, which in itself has value, I guess, because that's sometimes them finding their voice. But there's so many amazing artists that don't get recognition because they don't get picked up by a big gallery. And then they don't get representation and they don't get discovered. And, I think a lot of these galleries do great things for artists, whether it's like a Gagosian or David Zwirner. I'm pulling a blank as well now, but there's, ones like that where they're able to kind of give a platform to people, but that's limited as well, right? They can only do that for so many. And equally, if you take a more cynical view, there'll be reasons as to why they try and do that. So for me, it kind of represents a new opportunity to give, like you say, monetization. I think it gives artists options as to what they do, right? They can still do their traditional art and their canvas work and print editions and that, but then it can be another tool in their belt. You don't have to solely be an NFT artist. It's a way to kind of create relationships with the audience that you couldn't do before, which I think is cool. And since I wrote that article, obviously Ferocious has just had that amazing result at Christie's. I think it's still going on, but you've seen Gary V come in since then, and he's done that V Friends thing, which I know he's not an artist, but the thing I thought was interesting was this idea of like, if you hold a certain card, it can entitle you to certain things. And so, maybe for artists, it could be a certain piece of ownership entitles you to a tour of their studio, exactly, or a commissioned piece once a year, or so. There's all these different options that you wouldn't have had before.
Besides just the art.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a really good point that you brought up the Gary V thing, because I like how you put that. Like, he might not be a traditional artist, but he had some very interesting tokens. Like, I was looking at the once a year podcast token. I was like, my gosh, if I could scoop that and be guaranteed once a year a podcast with Gary V, I mean, that's great content. Of course, I was priced out of that instantly. But you bring up an excellent point there, and it allows artists to kind of like tokenize and like monetize other parts of their craft that people are probably interested in, like going to see the studio or spend some time with them or hop on a phone call or have some other type of connection with them,
Yeah, totally. I think it gives such an interesting option or angle. I was speaking with a project about this the other day, and I won't go into too much because they're working on stuff, but that was part of what they were asking me about was, we want to do these things and we want to incorporate NFTs. And what I said to them was like, don't just make it about NFTs. And that it turned out to be their plan. But I was like, it can just be a feather in the cap, basically, where you can either give the option for artists to use it or bring in NFT artists, but equally it's just a way that you can get their audience or the collectors or creators just to have a relationship that they maybe historically weren't able to have. What I don't want to see is kind of getting the equivalent where you have these collectors or equivalents of galleries that are your kingmakers, where they end up saying that this person is now a top tier artist because they are represented or featured on this site. But equally, what I think you also can be in danger of doing, although it's somewhat done in art already, is that art just becomes commoditized, where everything is worthless in a sense because anything that can be created will be created and you can have access to it. So you kind of have to have a balance, I think, between you don't want gatekeepers, but at the same time you want creation and what people are making to be something special, and for people to recognize that and to build a relationship with these pieces, because that gives, it's not just about giving value in the sense of to the collector, but also to the creator, so that they're able to make a living.
That makes a lot of sense. And two good questions. Power Live and Poker Chef Jeff said, have you seen like any resistance or like experience getting traditional artists to use NFTs? Like, what has there? Do you think it's been difficult to get traditional artists to use NFTs, or have you seen a lot of traditional artists kind of crossing over?
Yeah, good question. From what I've seen, it's a real mixed bag. You've had some artists just seem to immediately kind of understand the value proposition and the opportunity, and they want to get stuck in because they're quite disruptive or just open-minded. And then, on the other side, you have loads who are resistant, either because they're cynical towards it and they don't think it's art, or also you have them with the environmental debate, and a lot of environmentally conscious artists who think for whatever reason that it's harmful, and so whether they're ill-informed or they're looking at the wrong data, they just don't want to put their name to it, and so they're slightly resistant. And then I think the final ones you have are just the ones who are kind of in between, where they're not opposed to it, but they're just a little bit hesitant. They're holding back to see what the early adopters do. So I've seen a real mixed bag, but yeah, you've seen some traditional artists kind of immediately trying to jump on. Some of them on the hype, but some of them just saying, right, this is cool. This is another medium for me to create and to express myself. I can't remember what the second question was. Sorry.
You basically covered it all, like how hard it was, or like, if you've seen traditional artists coming over and kind of what the difficulties were for some of them to bring their arts into the digital world. Have you seen like a lot of people digitizing physical art and selling both as a package? Like you get like a physical piece of art, whether that be like a statue or a painting, as well as like a digital version of that? Or is it mainly like one or the other?
No, I've seen people doing both. And I mean, I think this is where we're still so early and kind of exploring what an NFT is and what it means and what rights it grants you and all these kinds of things. But I've seen people scanning and digitizing art that they've made, and then selling that entitles you to the physical piece and an NFT or more unlockable content with that. I've bought some NFTs that have done that. You've got there's a really cool artist. Their Twitter's not a person, all one word. We should tweet them after, but they've done some really cool pieces where you buy it and you get extra unlockable content. I've seen artists doing it where they will, create a piece, maybe some of it's hype, and then digitize it and then burn it. The actual physical piece. Just, some of it maybe is to get attention, but other bit is part of the artist just expressing themselves in its performance, and that's part of the art. I've not seen a lot of resistance to it, apart from people are either resistant to it where they just don't want to get involved, or and so it's a moot point, or they're just really open to it and they just want to experiment. And then you've also got on the flip side, on the other side, there's services. So there's what's it, chain to canvas, I think it's called. I'm butchering this now, but where you can go and take like your hash masks, if you've got a hash mask, and you can go get that printed as a physical piece to have, which I think is a really cool idea, where you're kind of taking the on-chain stuff and then putting it into the physical world as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've heard of the hash mask like paintings, and is that an hash mask? Is that an artist, or is that like a type, like a company of art? I don't know.
Yeah, so hash masks were a release. They were a drop that was done. I can't exactly remember now. And they created a lot of hype at the time. That it was a kind of series of different artists. Some of it was hand finished, and you were able to buy them. They had, I think it was what would now be referred to as like a FOMO ramp, where basically the earlier you bought, the cheaper the price was, and so it started at something like 0.02 ETH, say, and then went all the way up to I think the last one was like 100 ETH. If you bought the final one, there's some nuance to that, where I think if you bought the final one as part of the previous tier, you got it for that price. But anyway, they were a release of art that you didn't see what you got before it, but when they dropped, like I participated and I got one, and like I love them. I think visually they're so cool, really unique. And so yeah, you were able to take your mask or masks that you got, hash masks, and then print them if you wanted as a tangible piece. So I'm actually looking at doing that at the moment. And then there was, so they were just a drop. There was also a thing around it where you can individually name it, and if you buy the mask, there's a name change token emission, and so you need a certain amount of them to be able to change the name, and that will stop after a certain period. And so you kind of had that unique identifier to them as well, and each name could only be used once at the time. So, but yeah, check them out. They visually, I think they were an amazing release. They were really cool.
It's so crazy how many different like avenues. I was thinking about this like after reading your article, that like artists and the way they're releasing these and like drumming up like scarcity, but also like having changes in the pieces and stuff like that is really interesting to me. And like, do you think it's a scarcity thing, or like there's like a lot of different ways to value art now you see coming up with NFTs, whether it be like, is it the number one piece release, like, you know, where it is in the line? Like, what do you think is providing value? Is it mainly just what a collector wants, or are there like key metric pieces of like what number in line it is and things like that? Because it's changing from quality. I guess in the traditional art world, it'd be like, how quality is this piece, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a bunch of things that I can see going on, and it kind of depends on the pieces and the drops and what they're doing. So for a lot of stuff that's going on, especially at the moment, you've got traits and rarity in these traits is how things are being valued. So and that goes back to CryptoPunks, but there's the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and then they've done the Kennel Club, but Wicked Craniums coming out. There was the Wizard that were dropped. I think that was yesterday, and a few others where traits are how they're being measured. So there's like a defined rarity as to these different things, and that basically will dictate as to how valuable or not they are, and then what the floor price is for them. If you kind of step back from that, which I think is kind of also directly crosses over to the more traditional collectible space, where things are a one of 100, and there's only 10 of them that are I don't know, that have a red hat, and 10 of them that have glasses, and all these kinds of things. That is, to me, more kind of the collectibles space, and how a lot of traditional collectibles are valued. Whether it's toys or Beanie Babies or
Like
whatever
baseball
that might
cards.
be. Baseball cards, exactly. Yeah. When it comes back to the art space or these kinds of things, then I think you have. I've not really seen like the actual edition number come into it much. Whether it's like the first one minted, but then it goes back to the image and whether the image resonates with people and how strong that is. Edition size does matter. Is it one of 10,000, one of 100,000, or one of 10? And then you have community, the community around it, and the story as well, the narrative. So similar to traditional art, then why is this piece meaningful? Like, what kind of place in history, whether it's NFT history or art history, does it have? What's the purpose and the story behind it? Why is this meaningful? What's the story that the creator put? Is there some sort of emotional resonance behind it, or is it something that's unique and just not been done before, or is it a combination of all these things? It's like you look at a Rothko, and people will say like, oh, well, I could do that. Anyone could do that. But if you go and actually stand in front of one, and if you know the history behind them, it's really hard to describe, I think, unless you stand in front of one. Sometimes it's similar with an NFT, where some pieces you'll just look at, and for whatever reason they just speak to you, or they own a significant place in history, and so that will give them value. So long-winded answer, but if it's the kind of more purely analytical cold stuff, it tends to come down to traits and rarity, and then outside of that, it's maybe more either emotional or your more standard things to do with edition sizes and history and who's created it and provenance, like ownership, that kind of stuff.
That makes a lot of sense, and I never really thought about the difference between like kind of collector works like baseball cards or Beanie Babies or something like that versus like artwork, and kind of how that's like blending with this NFT thing that's coming out. Like, you have artwork and you have like traditional artists doing like one-off pieces and stuff like that. But then you have like a lot of these like me bits and the things that we've talked about, you know, the crypto punks and stuff like that, where they're kind of like blending that like collectability with artwork, you
I
know.
think I think utility is another thing that we're still so early, and you know NFTs. What are they? They're different things to different people and in different situations. But you know, when it comes to collectibles, and you touched on me bits there, you know, there's a utility element with some of these things where are they usable in different situations? So, you know, are you going to be able to use, you know, like you can see, you can use your Meebit as an avatar in like Somnium Space or Decentraland, some of these different metaverses. So where it then takes on a different role where it's not just your profile picture on Twitter and you know, a file that you can say you own into something that's called a display. It also has a utility in the metaverse or in games, as an example, or does it represent ownership of you know, something else outside of just this this file itself? So I think utility is another angle for valuing some of these projects and some of these NFTs, but that's still very much being explored as to what utility even means.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and like what we're going to use them for. It's so early, and that's what's super interesting. You never know what all of this is going to get used for down the line. And one of the questions Power Live asked, like kind of in the beginning, was what do you think about tokenizing real world assets? I guess with that, like, you know, housing or something using NFTs. Do you think we'll see that coming down the line?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we will. I think that it's still there's still so many there's a lot of exploration left for it. So there was a house or an apartment that got auctioned. It was probably like a month ago now, by Proppy, I think is the name of the company that did it. And it was really interesting to see it happen. I think it was in the Ukraine. Um, that, that that the place was auctioned. I'm just googling it now to see, but the the thing was, it was basically a the NFT represented a company, was my understanding, and then the company owned this house, and so what you were essentially buying was a company and then its assets and liabilities, and one of these assets was a house in say it was the Ukraine. And so you're not quite there yet where it was like the title or the deed was represented by an NFT and you were directly exchanging that. So there's still some nuance to it. But again, the tech is so early. It's just not quite there yet. I think we will have to see it happen at some point and in some way. You know, part of the stuff I do on the venture side is in prop tech, and you know, blockchain is something that we've just not really seen interrupt or penetrate there yet. But property is an example, and the whole real estate world is always a slight laggard in technology. It's very slow to change because it's a very risk averse space, and you know, there's a huge amount of money, and there's already at stake, and there's already a huge kind of incumbent system that you have to change. So I think that we will see tokenized real world assets coming on more and more. Equally, you've got, you know, more and more Oracle solutions coming up. So you've got UMA and Chainlink, and there's other options. I mean, Uniswap has been put forward, right? Vitalik, I think, suggested they could be used as an Oracle. So as I think as the Oracle solution gets worked on more and more as well, you're going to be able to see real world assets and real world data come on chain and be tokenized in a way that we're just not quite there yet. But I struggle to see how at least some of it can't. I don't think blockchain is the be all end all and solves everything, but I think we will see more options for real world assets coming online on chain and being tokenized. Yes.
Yeah, I've like worked in real estate a bit and did some house flipping and wholesaling and stuff like that to other investors, and definitely like the troubles with title and using a title agency and just kind of like the old legacy systems of how that chain of ownership is written and liens and all that stuff and having to get title insurance. I mean, that's like the majority of the problem when like switching ownership of a property. But I definitely agree with you. Like the regulation and everything that's got to come along with it to have just straight up title on the blockchain, easily transferable, is probably going to be a
Yeah.
while down the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it is.
Hans had a good question, kind of. He said, "What are you familiar with the Binance Genesis Premium collection of NFTs?" And like, I kind of that goes into like FTX even is doing NFT collections and things like that. What do you feel about stuff like that and like exchanges and all the different places getting into NFTs?
Yeah, I've not looked a load into the Binance Genesis collection. I'm slightly, I'm not, cynical is maybe not the right word when it comes to this stuff, but I don't pay too much attention to when it's, as much as, Binance calling it a traditional corporate is maybe slightly unfair because it's part of Web3, but when it's corporates getting into the space I've just not paid loads of attention to them because I've been more interested in either what artists are doing or what NFT companies are kind of trying to create. So if that's like Animoca and like F1 Delta Time, or seeing what Dapper Labs are doing, with Top Shots, or if it's, Gods Unchained and, Yield Guild, or all these different things like that, I've kind of, in my limited amount of spare time, looked a little bit more into versus just kind of, Twitter dropping NFTs because there's a bit of hype, or was it like Pringles or Coca-Cola? Like there were some companies like that who were dropping NFTs because I think like it just felt like the thing to do. So I can't really comment too much on them apart from to say I view it with a little bit more cynicism. That it's maybe just more of an advertising campaign, which is fine, and that's their thing to do, but I've just not paid as much attention to it.
What do you think about, like, I tried to play around with the Dapper Labs and like the NBA Top Shots, and I just found it was like kind of weird. I feel like they hadn't evolved that much, and I also couldn't withdraw my money for months.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like it seemed a little like kind of collector scammy to me. Like, I don't know. Do you think something like that's gonna last? Do you think there's like a big wave of like just pushing stuff out to sell it, and like a bunch of people are gonna buy it just because it's the first of whatever company is releasing whatever? Do you like? I feel like there might be a lot of pain for people that are just kind of buying first in all these different companies that might
Yeah,
not really make it.
Dapper, I've seen again a lot of debate and contention around, people kind of shouting out that it's centralized and it's not always collector friendly. I think it's just a kind of reflection of where we're at, where we're so early and people are still trying to figure out how to make this stuff work at scale and in user friendly ways, where you're trying to onboard people that aren't necessarily crypto or DeFi natives. And so, it's easy when you're in this space, I think, to get kind of slightly myopic or slightly slightly focused and not realize how unintuitive this is for most people. The idea of going and buying Ethereum, setting up a wallet, transferring it from Coinbase or Kraken or wherever you've gone, going to a protocol, connecting your MetaMask or whichever wallet you're using, exchanging your ETH for an NFT, or participating in a drop and doing that is really intimidating and not that straightforward or easy for most people. Whereas, like what I get why like Nifty Gateway are doing it, where you just kind of use your credit card and buy, or I understand what Dapper Labs or someone like that is trying to do with making it a little bit more intuitive or Web 2 based for people. So I've not got any Top Shots. And so, but I've heard about people obviously having trouble trying to withdraw off of the platform, and I kind of can't comment as to what's going on there. But I think we've just not found the happy medium yet, and that we're still doing a lot. We're still having a lot of growing pains as to finding out how these things work.
That makes a lot of sense, and yeah, you put up some very good points there. And like, there are a bunch of different companies trying different avenues, so it's just so early. Everybody's just kind of trying different things, and we'll see what kind of shakes out as the winner over time. Um,
Yeah. I do
yeah,
also on that point though, I do think like NFTs are one of the ways that a lot of people are gonna be pulled into the space. I don't necessarily think that people who buy NFTs are automatically then going to go and become DeFi power users as such. But I just think it's like another way to kind of, if we can get it right from a, excuse me, from a UX UI perspective, it's a way to abstract the underlying technology while still kind of showing how it provides value. But we're just not there yet, or we're partially there and we're working on it.
that makes a lot of sense, yeah. And another part of like kind of getting back towards like artists and stuff like that, and a part of your article that I found really interesting was like talking about artist resale rights. Can
Mm.
you like go into that a little bit and how that works with like super rare or OpenSea or anything like that?
Yeah. So what really interested me in the NFT space initially, or one of the things, was this idea of being able to automate artist resale rights. And what that means, kind of circling back traditionally, is some art you have artist resale rights, and that entitle the artist to a percentage of the art that gets sold on in perpetuity. So if I buy, I'm not saying this is the case by the way, but I don't know, say David Hockney says that he gets 4% of his art when it's sold on in perpetuity. And so if I buy a piece off of someone for £100,000, he's entitled to 4% of that. If I then sell it on for $1 million, he's entitled to 4% of that. What has happened in the past and what's tricky is, apart from with bigger people or with collectors or with honest people, a lot of this either doesn't get reported or just gets missed. And so artists don't get the money that they're entitled to. And it can be quite convoluted trying to chase it up, or it can result in legal disputes. And so, again, like I say, artists just don't get the money that they're entitled to. I think what you're able to do with NFT sometimes is automate this to a degree. It doesn't solve all these problems, but if art is sold on a platform, whether it's OpenSea or Super Rare or one of these, you're basically able to automate resale rights or royalties, as it were, and the artist gets a much greater percentage of what they're entitled to. You can't currently automate it when stuff is sold off platforms. And sometimes it also doesn't translate if it's bought on one platform and then sold on another. However, that is happening more and more. So it's just something that I'm really bullish on, because it's a huge pain point for a lot of artists already. So if you're even able to improve that 20% of the time, 40% of the time, 60% of the time, that's a marked improvement as to what currently happens. And you're just basically giving artists more of the money that they're entitled to, and a way to be able to make more of a living off of these NFTs. And if their value goes up exponentially, 4% of $100, and then it trades all the way up to $1 million, that can be a life-changing amount of money for people.
Absolutely, and I didn't even know that was like a thing in the traditional art world, that there were contracts that kind of came along with resale of art or anything like that, that artists could pick up,
Yeah.
any profits like that.
Yeah, it's just a tricky area where it, like I say, it doesn't always work the way it should.
Hmm. It's really interesting though that kind of this kind of helps solve that problem, and like you said, like it allows smaller artists to come up and they can sell for a lower dollar amount at first, but as it changes hands and that price of the art kind of appreciates over time as they get their artwork out, it's really interesting that they can kind of like capture that value. And like you said, you start out with like $100, but if a piece gets to selling for $1 million, that captured value ends up being pretty life changing for an artist.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something that's so interesting, and it just has a chance again when you talk about being able to create this economy for digital artists or traditional artists, being able to create bonds and links between artists and their collectors, and then being able to automate, at least to a degree, a larger percentage of these artist resale rights or royalties. You just start creating a livelihood for people that that wasn't possible before this.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps people kind of monetize like what would traditionally be like a hobby or something like that and be able to, potentially make it into a job that they can do full time and support themselves,
Yeah.
which gets really interesting. And like kind of getting into the last piece of your article, like valuations and market maturation, like we've kind of touched on this a little bit. Like, where do you think valuations stand right now? And kind of what do you think like the market needs to see like as it matures?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. It's very volatile. Um, I think there's a lot of crap being released
Yeah.
amidst a lot of good stuff, and it's really easy to miss some of the interesting stuff. Every other week or every other day, it feels like there's a drop of something that's 10,000, 6,000, whatever, and I don't tend to get involved in a lot of it. Because historically I'm not really a flipper. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think that they provide a point in the market, and I would like to do more of it. But historically, I'm just more of a collector, and I will sell stuff, but not. I'm not looking to all the time. I think that valuations are tough because it really goes project to project, and there's a hype cycle. Obviously, stuff's pulled off a lot from the top, but NFT sales are still quite robust. I think there's a danger in buying these projects because you can get caught holding the bag. That's very easy to do. There's floor prices on a lot of these things, and that's how people seem to tend to at least get some idea of value. Is basically if you own a punk, or you own a Bored Ape, or you own a Wicked Cranium, or any of these things, an Axie, whatever, that basically the floor price is X, and that's what you can kind of be relatively assured to get out at. But I think valuations are tough. You don't want to get caught in the middle. I think you're either buying stuff because you like it, or you believe in the project and you think it's a long-term hold, or you're buying stuff to try and flip and to try and get off immediately and sell. And I think if you're anywhere in the middle, that you're going to get burnt very quickly and made to look very foolish very quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. And like I guess like what are your thoughts on like as the market matures? Like where do you go to find new projects that you're interested in? Where do you keep your eye on to like find new projects? How can people like find new artists and projects?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. So as the market matures, I think valuations will change because the market will almost dictate what's valued, right? And so if it's traits, then don't argue with it, go with it. But and it depends on what you're buying. Are you buying a kind of utility project? Are you buying a more traditional, just a JPEG, as it were, but it's just a kind of 2D traditional piece of art, or are you buying some of these other projects? So that will change as the market matures, and valuations will change. I think if you look, where do you keep up with stuff? I think it's Twitter massively, and that tends to be where I go. And then you kind of look from Twitter into the Discord channels and the Telegram channels, and finding things from there. But I think it's really hard to beat Twitter from a community perspective, because you see what's respected, and there are people who are just really smart and way smarter than I am on there, who you can respect and find out stuff. And equally, there are just people that are cool, and they're creative, and they're creative types. And so there's just some artists I'll follow on there, and I just like their vibe, or I like what they're creating, or I like what they're interested in. And so if they're saying things, or they like an artist, I might just find someone and be like, oh, that's really cool, and I like the image, and I like what they're making. So yeah, I think Twitter's hard to beat, to be honest.
Are there any like NFT drops that you're waiting for, just in anticipation of right now, that are about to drop, that you've had your eye on?
Do you know, there aren't right this second? No. There's so much coming out that I think it's really hard to keep track of. And I try and not, at least at the moment, kind of participate in the hype train, where there's just a drop every week. I think the profile picture kind of side of things seems to be cooling down a bit. There's been a lot of hype around that. And so, no, there's no drops that come to mind, though, for me right now.
Okay. Nunchi has a good question. Any thoughts on how the future of minting NFTs with non-digital or tangible products is going to be?
Ooh, that is a good question.
I know
With
that.
non-digital products, with tangible products. No, I mean, I think it's intimately wrapped up with just the standard minting process. I think that I see a multi-chain future. I see a whether that's L2s and side chains, or looking at like near protocol or projects like that. I think there's going to be more options there. I do wonder whether things will fracture. So whether you'll have more chains that are use specific. So will you have more NFT chains and things like, is that where Dapper Labs and areas like that can kind of really add value, is by focusing on gaming and NFTs and doing that really well. I think you have interesting projects like Mintbase and Mintable, where and ones like that, where the easier they can make it for artists or creators in general to get started and to mint their own NFTs, the better. And they're kind of, I think there'll be like a Shopify type model where you're able to set yourself up with a store and then connect that, if you're minting stuff that's non-digital or off-chain, and connect that with it. And I think that people who are offering easy and quick products like that are going to be winners. So like I say, a kind of almost Shopify for creating your own shops for minting NFTs.
Yeah. Do you see like live VR and stuff like virtual reality kind of mixing with NFTs in the future and stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the NFT space is going to just continue to get bigger and fracture in a way, where you'll have your more traditional art or artists. And then I think gaming is a real killer use case for NFTs. And how that evolves, I'm not immediately sure yet, but there's going to be, there's going to be a lot of use cases around that. And there's going to be abilities for people to create their own, like Animoca brands, and is one that I look to as like a cool idea, where you've got this F1 Delta time and you can kind of make your own Formula One cars and race them, or like you've got Z Run with the horses and horse racing, and then you're able to take that, and then they're already making horse racing tracks on, like, I think it's Decentraland, I saw it. So there's going to be a lot of use cases like that I think are really interesting.
Yeah, that stuff's super interesting. I have some friends getting into like Zed Run and stuff like that, and I'm gonna really have to take a look at what is the Animica brands? What is that? Explain that a little more.
Animoca. So Robbie Young, I know from Twitter, who's a really good guy, but they're Animoca, Animoca brands, and they're like an NFT gaming, blockchain gaming platform, but there's F1 Delta time is one of the things that they've created. And so, yeah, check that out. It's really interesting. And I think that's a huge, I think just gaming in general is a huge use case for NFTs.
I agree. I think like we're gonna see a lot of that coming in the future, and like kind of just to wrap it all up here with the end of your, and we touched on this a little bit, but just this is just such a great way that gaming and NFTs is a way of adoption into cryptocurrency, and it just kind of leads people, I think, into crypto eventually through gaming, and they're probably not even gonna know the stuff they own is on the blockchain, and I think that's when we get the real adoption through gaming and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally agree. I think abstracting this stuff away to a degree, where I think at the end of the day, what you want is people are confident that they really own this, that they can prove it, and that it operates outside of a game or a game provider, as an example in the gaming community. So they don't care whether it's a blockchain or not. I don't think that's the essence for them. It's just, like I say, being able to prove they can own it, be confident that they do, and that it operates outside of that, and that it has interoperability. So if you're able to abstract that away, that's, I think, where kids are just gonna, kids grow up playing these games, right? And the digitally native people, whether they're 35, 55, or 15 or 5, the idea of owning something digital to them is just not that abstract. But abstracting away the blockchain side of things is kind of, I think, important, because it just drives adoption then, because people then don't care. They just want to play the game. And if they can then own that skin outside of it and port it to another game, or they can own that piece of art and show it, or they can use it in all these different ways, that is the killer use case, and that is what drives adoption, in my opinion.
Makes a lot of sense. Before I let you go, we've gone a solid hour here. What are your thoughts on like the crypto market in general? Like just Ethereum price action, Bitcoin price action, and like NFT adoption or DeFi adoption. What do you think is a big driving factor, and where we're at today? You know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've had a rough few months, but I think anyone who's been around the space for long enough is unsurprised by the volatility, and I think recognizes that that's part of this adoption curve. And you know, if we're here for the long run, we're all taking a long-term bet on this, and so these kind of short-term movements, as it were, shouldn't move you too much. That you just think, you know, if we're right here, then it's a 5, 10, 15 plus year bet, and that's what we're taking. So that's kind of generally my attitude. I think the NFT space just has a chance to just keep growing and drive adoption, and equally to, I think, to be a gateway drug, as it were, to a lot of people, where it just opens up their eyes and their interest in the space. And to do that, you know, NFTs were declared dead, right? Like a month, 2 months ago. And yet, you know, we've kind of gone from strength to strength. I think it's still a relatively niche market, and there's a lot to be figured out. But I think that's part of the fun, is seeing all these people kind of creating, and we're really at the bleeding edge in a lot of ways, where people are just trying things and novel things, and they're being open-minded, and the community is great for that. And I think that's what's exciting. So, and from a crypto market point of view, I don't know, are we in a bear market or not? I'll leave that for other people to debate. I think all we're going to do is keep investing, keep building, and just keep trying to have interesting conversations and see where that takes us.
Yeah, and let that leave the trading to the traders, huh?
Yeah, I've tried that too many times, and I suck at
it. Same here, man.
Yeah,
I buy tops and sell bottoms. It doesn't
exactly.
work well.
I think we've got a few mutual friends between us who are a lot better than that. Better at that than we are, and if they want to ever share any alpha with us, I'm always open to it, but I'm going to leave it to the pros.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Man, this has been a great one. I learned so much, and I really enjoyed the Medium article. I put it in the chat. What is the best way for people to kind of keep up with you, your writing, stuff like that? How do you want people to follow along in the future?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've loved it, and definitely there's so much more we could chat about. Twitter is probably the best place. People can reach me. I'm responsive on the DMs. I try and help out where I can. I have a lot of NFT projects message me, which is really nice. And so, yeah, I'm always open to kind of advising and giving advice wherever I can help out. So yeah, I'd say Twitter is the best place, to be honest, for now. I've got a few articles in the pipeline, but I've been procrastinating massively, as I do this only in my spare time. So I try and do that. But yeah, Twitter would be the best place. I'm excuse me, I'm What's All This on Twitter with 2 S's at the end. So yeah, I think you may have shared it in the chat already. But yeah, What's All This with 2 S's to finish, and that's the best place to reach me.
Man, we'll make sure we get that in the description on the YouTube and everything like that. And it has been awesome having you on today. I haven't really dove into NFTs, and now I find myself wanting to maybe look into some of these projects you've mentioned today, and maybe
Come down the rabbit
purchase
hole.
my first. Yeah.
Yeah. Check out, there's a good magazine I've done a little bit of help with called NFTs.whatthefuck. So .wtf. NFTs.wtf. They're super early. They're really cool and trying to build in the space. Like I said, I've just done a very limited amount with them, but from what I can see, they're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and there's some great people involved in the background with them. So I hope that they continue to go from strength to strength as well, and help to keep educating people in the space. But they're a cool source to check out at the moment.
That's awesome, man. I just brought them up here, and I'll have to check them out. And then as you release a new article, I would love to have you on again and do this again and kind of keep the discussion going. So
100%. Yeah. We only scratched the surface, right?
Absolutely. We could probably go on for hours, I'm sure.
Thank you for having me on, though. I've loved it, Rand. It's been really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kieran, and we will definitely do this again.
Deal.
All right, brother. You have a good one.
You too. Take care, and thanks for tuning in, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for watching the YouTube videos. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, comment down below, help us out with the YouTube algorithms. And we're live 5 days a week on Twitch, 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. EST. Come check us out. Thanks for watching.